Welcome to part 4, where we are going to go through the ESXi host. This is the business equivalent of your Workstation Pro from VMware. ESXi is also made by VMware. So from the beginning, unlike your PC at home, when you switch it off, it is off. And you have to go to it to switch it on. You probably have a power button on your PC at home. You press the power button, the PC comes on. In the business world, all the servers are normally collated in a thing called a server room, which is air conditioned, raised floor in case of flooding, and also has fire protection, normally gases that are burst out of the ceiling, etc. if a fire breaks out in the server room to smother everything. That is not breathable. Do not go in there when that has happened. You'll know when it's happened. So if there is a planned power down, you would physically go in and power off all these machines. You would do what is called a graceful shutdown. That is like logging in and saying shut down this machine. You can do graceful shutdowns on virtual machines by using the guest OS shutdown option. But when it comes to powering them back on, you do not have to go in and turn each individual server on. If they're virtual machines, obviously you're just going to log into your virtual client and power them on. In order to get the virtual machines on, you need to power on the host. Now, if you're not there to physically power on the host by pressing the button, if it's a Dell machine, you can use something they call iDrac, Integrated Dell Remote Access Controller. You can see on the screen that this is version 6. If you're using HP, it's called ILO, which stands for Instant Lights Out, but it's the same thing. My physical server is off. There is power plugged into it, there is network plugged into it, but it is off. And using the network port that is allocated for iDrac, and you can allocate the iDrac to be on the management port along with the data ports that you're using already if you don't want to use the dedicated iDrac port. In other words, if you only have one cable you can plug into it rather than two, one in the iDrac, one in the data. You can log into it using this method. So here you can see there is a login here for this iDrac, and it says there quite clearly this domain, this iDrac. If I hit submit, put the credentials in already, they get verified, and as you can see it's bringing us in. So here we go, we've got the R710, PowerEdge R710 Dell, and now it's loading the main sheet. Now you can launch a console, which you can see the launch button here and the console here. These older versions that I have used Adobe Flash Player, which is now decommissioned. So this won't technically work for me. I mean, we can change the settings to HTML5 and play about with it, but I'm not going to log into the console because I don't need to. There are things you can do when you're in this page, like you can update the BIOS. You can see the BIOS version is 6.6. Can update that using the iDrac. If you go along the top, you've got setup, you can change the boot device, etc. You've got the power controls. Current power status is off. Now I can power on the system and click apply and it will boot the system up, and we are going to do that in a minute. I can gracefully shut down the system if it was on, or I can power cycle, which is the equivalent of someone pressing and holding the power button until it went off. Also, from within the iDrac settings you can change the iDrac settings themselves, the IPv4 settings, the IPv6 settings, other network settings will be under there. You can also add users who you will allow to log in. So you create a new user and give them to turn it on, etc., or turn it off. You can use Active Directory if you want to, using LDAP, Microsoft Active Directory. Basically means on your domain controller you can create a user specifically that can do this. The thing is, you'd have to have a domain controller up and running for it to authenticate you. And as mentioned earlier, you can do the BIOS update from here. So you can browse to your BIOS file that you've downloaded from Dell's site or HP if you're on a HP server, upload it, and then you can apply it. If it doesn't work, you'll have the option here to roll it back to a previous version. So let's get to the reason we're here, which is to power the system on so that I can access the server. At the moment I have intrusion and removable media is available. If I click this power on off button, say yes, that is the same as going to the power setting and then clicking the power cycle button. You have a little no signal on the screen now that I've refreshed. As I said, I don't think I can get this to work using Java. I think to get it there is using Java. And as you can see now, we have batteries, fans, intrusion, power supplies, removable flash media, temperatures and voltages all lit up as a status of green. They're working fine. In the background, you can't see it because it's very small here in this little console screen until I can get this virtual console to work. As you can see here on this little screen, because I can't get the console to work, that there's some it's changing the screens already. If I refresh this, you can see now the Dell logo has popped up on the console window and the little white bar moving across. You can see at the bottom there is it loading, going through the boot setup of the server. You may remember I told you in a previous video that you can buy these servers. This is a PowerEdge R710. You can buy these refurbished on eBay for around £300. They come with 128 gig of RAM, 24 cores processor, and some will come with hard drive space. You want to make sure that they do have either an ILO or an iDrac if it's a Dell. If I click refresh now on this screen, yep, you just saw it move across a bit further. So I'll pause the video. I'm just resuming the video because I can see on the console screen that starting the load up boot procedure for ESXi and VMware. It's going through the checks, loading the drivers, etc. This shouldn't take longer than about 2 or 3 minutes. And it has finished loading the ESXi. I know you can't read it and I apologise, but on here on the main screen, if you could see the console, and if you plug a screen into the server directly through the console socket, you'll be able to see what this says, and it says the IP address in V6 and V4 to log into this host. I already know what the address is, so I don't need to look at that, and now I can flick straight to it here. 70, you see there. So let's log in. And what we've got here is, see it says in the recent tasks, under task, power on VM, domain controller. So what we've got is a machine that is set to auto power on at start. So once the ESXi host had powered itself on, the first thing it turned on, the virtual machine, is a domain controller. And that makes obvious sense because then you can start adding other machines that can authenticate to that, and your client machines can authenticate. Quick rundown of the side panel here. CPU, so we've got 35 gig in total and we've got 34 gig free. The other 765 hertz currently used is by that domain controller. Probably has, and I can show you in a minute, the domain controller is probably using about 8 to 16 gig of RAM. Here it only shows you what it's actually using, so the rest is available. RAM 127.99, which is 128 gig, of which I'm using 4 gig and 23 spare, and the capacity is 6.1 terabytes. I've used 2.53 terabytes and I have 3.57 terabytes free. And you can see the 12 CPUs here, 2.93 gigahertz. They're dual core, which basically means I have 24 cores to use. IP addresses that we may need. We've got a live feed of the performance here as the IOPS go in and out for the CPU. And let's go to the virtual machines. So here you can see a domain controllers on, and you can also see a virtual machine, and Apple Mac is on. There are other virtual machines here. There's a file server with 68 gig used, a Win 10 client machine, another Win 10 client machine, a CentOS 7 Linux client, Ubuntu client is an Android client, and a pfSense, which is another Linux machine. It's not been configured yet. So you can see the home lab here. It's called DC1 homelab1.com. DC1 is the domain controller. home.lab1.com is the domain. So let's quickly go to storage. So on the storage side, I have SSD, which is 104 gig, and 6 terabytes space, which are 32 terabyte disks. It's called VM because it's the VM's 600. If I show you the SSD first, if we click data store browser, you can see I have an ISO folder in there, and these are the ISO. If I were to build a new machine, I would explore to the SSD drive, into the ISO folder, and pick machine I want to build. If I want to look at machines I already have, if I go into VMs, you can see they're listed here. High Sierra is not in the right place, and nor is Android, but the rest are all here. Big Sur is here, And the reason this has two versions, one 80 gig and one 1 gig, is because the 80 gig is the hard drive and the 1 gig is the snapshot. So I've obviously took a snapshot of that High Sierra at some stage before making other changes to it, and here is the data. You can create a template from a machine by taking a copy of this file and the snapshot and this VMX file and putting them in another separate folder here and then re-importing them. But we can come through to that later. And it's fairly straightforward for you to get your images on here. You go to where you want to keep your images, you just click upload and then you select where they are on your home PC or on your server if that's where you're storing them, and upload them to this folder. You can move and copy them once you're here, create new directories, etc. Networking, I have a VM network with 2 active ports, 2 Ethernets, and the management network which is part of those 2 ports. So back to the hosts, you can manage this, so you can select the auto start, pick a machine you want to auto start, click enable, and it will power on when the machine powers on. Obviously you can set your time and date, and you can also tell the machines to get, the virtual machines to get their time and date from the host, which is this, whatever it is here. You can edit this to use an NTP server, time server basically. You would need to have the service running obviously and configure where the service would be. You'd be able to start when the host starts, and you would list out by IP address what the servers are, and there's plenty out there on the web. You can set who can log into this. So there's my name as an admin, I can log in, and root can log in, and you can give those people different roles. So if you've got someone you want to let have a look around, you can give them the read-only access. If you want them to have full control, just give them the administrator access. You can also see what services you've got running, and you can start and stop them, but importantly SSH is here. Start this service and access it. As standard, it isn't enabled, but you can enable it here. And you can also monitor what's happening and where it was peaking. So now let's go back to the host. You can shut down, reboot, create a VM, register a VM like we mentioned earlier with that VMX file and the hard drive if you've copied it and moved it somewhere else. And you can be more graceful about it. You can enter maintenance mode, which suspends all the VMs, or if you have 2 hosts that are a cluster, it will try to V-motion them across to the other host before entering maintenance mode. If this is the only host in the cluster, then it will power them down before entering maintenance mode, and you can then shut it down. It's more of a graceful method, but when you power it back on, you have to take it out of maintenance mode. So the best thing to do is to turn your virtual machines off and then just shut down. Don't go into maintenance mode unless you want to do something with it. And your virtual machines, you could shut down and suspend, which is basically pause them, including their memory. Or you can guest OS shut down, which will gracefully shut down that guest OS. One thing I will show you here is that with the Apple products, because you can't install VMware tools on there, you can't do a guest OS power down. There's the option to install VMware tools, but it will fail. So what you can do is you can just power it off. That's it, powered off, and you can see here it's no longer green like the domain controller is. It is off. And you can power a server on just by clicking on it and click power on, or click the play button. You'll get to see it coming up in this little window here. Here it comes. You can also click this window, which will then give you a bigger display. You can watch it come up. You can control the VM from here, so you don't have to use the IP address and RDP to it. You can control it from here. So what you'll get here on this file server is a login prompt, and because the DC is up, you can then log into it. As we've said before, if the DC is not up and you haven't logged into the server before, you won't be able to log into it. If your DC is not up and you have logged in before, you can log into it because it will have cached credentials. And we'll just wait for this. And as you can see, it's applying the default domain policy, which is where we mentioned GPOs, the group policy objects, earlier on in the sessions. And that's it complete. You can then go actions, down to guest OS, and then hit send Control Alt Delete. That will send Control Alt Delete to the screen. And here we are, Lab Administrator. I'll type in a password. Okay, it was a lot faster than I thought it was going to be, because it has 6 CPUs and 16 gig of RAM. And there you see it loaded in. So I'll close that window. And what we can do now is we can go through some of the processes with this file server. You can take a snapshot of it. You can manage a snapshot, as you see here. You've got manage snapshots. Take one, call it whatever you like. I'll untick the memory and you just let it go. It shouldn't take long. You can close that. And you can see down here it's just completed successfully. If I now go to my snapshots manager again, you can see GG is here. I can delete that snapshot, or I can delete them all, or delete that one, and that will be it deleting you. And you can close this, you'll see it appear down in the bottom here. It's just deleting the snapshot now. So to give you an idea about creating virtual machines, you just create one. New virtual machine, yes, give it a name, new server, and then what you can do, you can say it's compatible with 6.7 ESXi, because that's the version we're using, because that's a free version that comes from VMware. It is a Windows, and we can say it is a 2016 for instance, or later. Click next, it's going to say select the storage type. So where do I want to store it? So I've been storing them here, as you know. Then you give them the VMware options: 2 CPUs, 4 gig of RAM, 40 gig hard drive, whatever else you need. Now at this point you can choose the CD drive, and that's where you're going to put data ISO file. It's gone straight into the SSDs, into your SSD ISO folder. And down here is a 20, there's the 6 on the end, 2016. You select it, you click next. You can now see a summary of the server, new server. That's where it's going to be stored. This is the guest OS, this is the host OS. 2 CPUs, 4096 meg, which is 4 gig, 1 network adapter, and if you come down, here's the 40 gig hard drive. That's going to be on that data store. Any key to boot from DVD, we'll say yeah, we want that. It starts loading the files, and it's now going to go through the process of installing the 2006 server, and you are going to get asked questions about what language you want, for instance. As you can see, it's just popped up. You know, you'll also get what keyboard and all your other attributes that you normally would get when you boot and install a server. So I'm not going to go through the process. I've got enough servers. I'm going to close that window. I'm going to power it off. I'll say yes, and I'm going to delete it. Any questions, put them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them.